Hello guys and welcome to another deck list, this time for OP05, the ENEL deck. Like, this deck is pretty similar to Katakuri from OP3, it's just that we're gonna be introducing, right, some Skypiea cards, and then the leader itself is quite busted. So let's take a look. We start with ENEL as our leader card, right? Once pattern in the opponent's turn, when your life hits 0, you then may add the top card of your deck to your life. Then you discard one card from your hand. That's a pretty busted ability, if you ask me. You start with 4 lives, that's the trade-off, right, of this leader. But then, yeah, every time, like, when you hit one card left in your lives and then you have to remove it, either by an attack or by an effect on the opponent's turn, then you can choose to just gain 1 life, discard 1 card from your hand. So this deck is really difficult to deal with because you can heal pretty consistently, right? And then you have a lot of things to defend. So this deck can be quite tricky. Okay, now this deck is gonna have a lot of cards that you guys can probably change, like the amounts, and then you can swap cards because this is not a definitive deck or anything. It's just my personal preference, right? Like the cards that I think that work really well with this deck. And then as you play with these decks, you can again change the cards to suit your tastes, or just change things to face whatever you are facing normally in your tournaments and stuff. If you have problems dealing with other kind of decks, then you can change cards, right? So now we're gonna start with Shirahoshi. I like to put like 2 to 3 copies of this card. This card is really good. It's just an on play, you draw 3, you discard 2, so you get +1, right? And then it has a trigger that it plays by itself. And if you are in a pinch, you can probably play this hard play by 5 cost. Then you're gonna have that +1, the refresh on hand. And in another turn, you can drop a Katakuri, put it back to your lives so that you have another life, and then trigger it again. So even if you hard play this card, it's not a bad play, as you're gonna be having a lot of cards that really support this, right? And again, you have Katakuri, and I like to put here like 3 to 4 copies, right? 3 is okay, 4 is okay too, but this card is expensive right now. So I would say even if you have 2, you can still play this deck pretty normally. But if you already have a playset of Katakuri, 3 to 4 is the way to go, because you're gonna have a lot of cards that play by trigger, and you may want those to add to your lives, because this deck runs on low lives so that you can be more consistent, right? For anyone that doesn't know what this card does, for 8, it's an 8k. You play it and then you put one of your characters with a cost of 8 or less on the top or bottom of the owner's life area face up. That means that you can add, I don't know, let's say a blocker that you have already hard played, right, like playing the coast. You can put it back to your lives face up, or like an annoying card, you can put it back to the lives of your opponent, then make it trash their life so that you can get rid of that card, or you give to your opponent a blocker of their own that has like no counter cost. So you know, you can remove really problematic cards that they don't add really any value to the enemy, or you can probably save one of your attackers, right? You have attacked with a card, then that card can be played by trigger. You play this card, then you put that card back to your lives. That means you have another life. You can play it again by trigger, and then you are saving that card from being hit because it's already rested. So Katakuri has a Trizillion plays, so that's why it's on this deck. I think it's a vital card. Then we have Capone, 4 copies of this. Without a doubt, the best 2k counter I've ever seen, because if it's played from the trigger, you can make one of your opponent's leader or character cards not attack during the turn, so you can negate an attack with this card, which is amazing. And if not, at the worst case scenario, it's a 2k counter. So it's an amazing card. Now, Sanji, I like 3 to 4 copies. Again, it will depend on which cards you want to introduce to this deck. Then you are gonna lower in the copies or making introducing more copies of certain cards. 3 is okay, you can play 4. Sanji, for 4 it's a 5k blocker that, again, it's played by trigger. Like, you discard 1 card from your hand, then you play the card, right? So it's an amazing card. Again, you can combo it infinitely. Okay, Yamato, this card is really good for this deck. Like, this is one of the best cards for this deck, just because you're gonna be using the ENEL leader ability when your life hits 0, so then you add 1 life, right? And then at your turn, if you have 1 life, you can play this card. And it's 9 cost, it's quite expensive, but on play you are gonna KO one of your opponent's characters with a cost that is equal or less than the total life yours and your opponent added up. So if your opponent it's like 2 lives and then you are at 1 life, you can KO 3 to lower cost, and that's always the case. Like, you can always play that ability, but if you have 1 or less life cards, you add 1 card to your lives from the top of your deck, which is amazing. Like, if you are playing ENEL leader, in this case, then you are at 0 lives, then you add 1 life because of the leader effect, then your turn comes by, you play this, and then you're at 2 lives already. So again, this deck can heal like crazy. It's so difficult to be dealt with. Yamato is a pretty strong card. Like, you're adding lives, probably killing some blockers or annoying cards of, I don't know, cost 3, cost 4 in the worst case scenarios. And then again, you have a 9k on the table, so it's really busted. 4 copies without a doubt. Then we move into ENEL Super Rare. Like, this card, you can play it, you cannot play it. I see this card as a really good opportunity to have presence of the field, right? Because it's difficult to get rid of this card. If you are like played against a deck that can instantly KO at really high cost, or remove it by paying like a lot of dons, and then they remove a really high cost or something to your hand, to your deck, to your lives, whichever the case, you are always gonna have at least 1 time the ability to deal with that, right? So this is for 7, a 7k rush card. Again, that's pretty nice, it has rush. And if this character were to be removed from the field in any way, you may trash the top card of your life instead. So you trash one of your lives, but this card does not leave play, which can be really good in a lot of scenarios. Like, you can force your rival to like waste resources with that, or he can probably trigger you into wasting a life, right? But then they're gonna have to like do a really hard removal, right, for a cost 7. So that way you can probably deal with that. It's only once per turn, so you're gonna be having to be careful with that. And then if a Monkey D. Luffy is on the field, this effect does not apply, which is scary, but really situational, right? So I think 2 copies, 3 is really decent for this card. You can play it or not in this deck. Like, it's really optional. I just really like that you can have a 7k on the table really consistently, right? Because it's difficult to deal with and it has rush. Okay, this card, 4 copies, that's 4 cost, 5k, and then if you have 2 or less life, which is pretty normal on ENEL, this character is gonna be a 6k, which is amazing, and it also has counters. So for 4, I would say it's a 6k with 1000 counters, so it's never gonna be a dead card on your hand, right? And then in the on play, you look at the top 5 cards of your deck, then you can reveal up to 1 holy card and add it to your hand. And then you can place the rest of the cards at the bottom of your deck and play up to 1 holy from your hand. Again, you can do this even if you don't get holy from the 5 cards that you draw. You can still do this to look for another one, right? So that would mean that you gain a new card. because you're gonna be discarding cards with this deck. So that's like a freebie that you can get. But if you already have Holy on hand, you can do that and then play it from your hand already. So it's not necessary that it has to be in this search that you are making, right? So that can make for another card. Again, we will be seeing Holy in a minute because there's order on this simulator. But yeah, this card, 4 copies without a doubt. Then we move into Gedatsu. This is a really decent card overall, right? For 5, it's a 6k, it has counter. Like, if your cards have counter at the very least, they are not gonna be dead weight because you can always like discard them or whatever. And then on play you KO up to one of your opponent's characters with cost equal or less than their life. That's really good for like KOing, like small blockers, stuff like that, right? Searchers, little cards that are really annoying on the field. You can just remove them with this, and then you're gonna have a 6k on the table, so it's really good. Okay, Connie's, this is gonna be purely a counter. Like, I don't see any other play for this card unless you are playing stages, which is really niche, if you ask me. But this is gonna be a 2k counter. It's just that this is a Sky Island card, because your searcher is gonna be looking for Sky Island cards. If you are playing like another kind of variation of the deck, which plays Big Mom cards, then you will use the other searcher, because you're gonna be looking for Big Mom cards more consistently than Sky Islands. It's just that this version has way more Sky Island cards than Big Mom cards, right? Okay, then you have Satori. This is the 2k counter that it can play by itself, right? And then, yeah, it's a trigger. It's for 5, a 5k that you're not gonna be playing normally. It's just that it's a counter, 2k counter that can play by trigger, so that's really cool. So 4 copies of that. Then we have Shura, and then this card can play by itself by trigger, which is really nice because this is gonna be your searcher again for any Sky Island kind of card. So again, really easy. You can play like 3 to 4 copies, right? A card that you need to use if you use a lot of Sky Island cards. Then we have Holly. Again, you can play any number of copies of this card. It's just that the and Holly combo is really busted. It's vanilla for 3, a 5k, it has 1000 counter. It's just that you can play it alongside So for 4 dons, that's the cost of you are also gonna have these for free on the field most of the times, and if you don't have already in your hand, you have a chance at drawing it, right? So it's pretty nice. Then we have Brule, and you can play this card or not at all, right? But I would recommend using these kind of cards because it's just a blocker that plays by itself by trigger, and then you don't really need to discard anything. So it's really good to have at least a couple of copies, right? Then we have Thunderbolt. This is again another optional card, and like you can play it, not play it. It would depend on what you are usually facing against in your tournaments. I think it's a good card to have at the very least a couple copies, right? Because you're gonna be trashing one card from your life area, but you can KO a cost 5 character, so you can get rid of really annoying characters. So just gaining the advantage on the field can be really good for this deck, because again, this deck can fill the field really consistently thanks to cards like ENEL being hard to remove. And then, yeah, you can just have a lot of pressure on the table. So reducing the pressure that the rival is getting you, or just KOing annoying blockers, is going to be good in any situation. And again, if you can play this by trigger, the better, because it's going to do the same. You just don't have to remove one of your lives. So it's really nice. Okay, Elthor, this is again another situational card. Like, you can play it, not play it. I like to play it, at least 1 or 2 copies, because for 1 don is essentially a 4k counter, right? The only thing that you have to take note of is that your opponent has to be at 2 or less life cards for you to gain the additional 2k counter. So it's more like Radical Beam, but in reverse, right? Okay, then we have the 200 million volt, I think I said that right, Amaru. this is an amazing card. Like, you can play a couple of these without any doubt in any variation of the deck. At the very least 2, 3 is okay too, because for 2 it's a main effect that you gain 3k, right, for this turn for one of your characters or leaders. It's not a counter, so you have to play it on your turn. But then if your life is 1 card or less, which is gonna be the most times in this deck, right? In ENEL, you're gonna be low life a lot of the time. You can rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So you can just rest a blocker, put this, and then you're gonna have 3k more on an attacker. That's really good. And then the trigger is also really good because you trust 2 cards from your hand and then you add a life from your deck to the top of your lives. So that's always good to have as an effect. But yeah, again, this deck is really good, and I forgot to mention that you can change some of these cards to, for example, put the cost 7 Lin, right? That is just also good. It's just that it's not searchable with this deck, and you have already a lot of cards that you cannot search, but you can change some of these cards to add it because it's a really good card to add. And I would add up to 4 copies of that without a doubt, because for 7k, and then you make the opponent choose to trash one of their lives on or add a life to yourself. So it's again a really good card that I would also consider adding without a doubt. It's just that this variation is pretty funny. This deck is pretty busted and is really difficult to deal with. But again, guys, thank you for watching. I hope you are enjoying this kind of videos. I didn't know if I was gonna continue doing deck list, but as I'm not playing a lot recently, yeah, I have that doubt, but I'm talking to some of my friends about the meta and what's best for this deck, what would be better, which cards could be used, and then we have a lot of theory going on, and then I'm like, I'm gonna continue doing this because I know some of the meta, right? So why not? I'm not that disconnected even if I'm not playing consistently right now. So again, I will be doing lots of these. Consider that I will be, yeah, you can expect that I will be uploading a Sakazuki 1 and then the Purple Luffy at the very least for OP5. And if it's a little bit late, you guys can have a rough look at what is being played in this meta, because there's still quite some time until OP6. So these decks are still gonna be good for some time. So again, if you want to try this and you have at least a really decent amount of these cards, because these cards can get really expensive, then again, I would try this deck. This deck is amazing. But yeah, again, thank you for watching. I'll be seeing you guys next video.